The sharp, stabbing ache in my left side made every shallow breath feel like a victory. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate the 3 fractured ribs. As I settled in at the grand mahogany dining table, adorned with my late wife's finest china, my daughter, Clara, gave me a fleeting, worried look before offering a brilliant, practiced smile to the 20 or so gathered guests. Our son-in-law, Victor Sterling, rose, his movements smooth and theatrical. He raised a crystal wine glass, catching the light of the chandelier. "A toast," Victor announced, his voice booming with false conviviality. "A toast to Robert Hawthorne, still tough as granite, even after that spectacular tumble down the lodge steps last month." His grin was all polished enamel and predatory confidence, reaching his cheeks but never his cold, dark eyes. "Guess the old man learned his lesson about walking around unlit premises in the middle of a blizzard. He added, the words dripping with manufactured concern. I met his gaze, holding my own expression perfectly neutral. Let him think I was just a clumsy, forgetful 70-year-old. Let him believe his carefully laid plan had worked flawlessly. He didn't know the truth. What Victor Sterling didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I hadn't fallen down those stairs at all. I had been pushed, and I had the undeniable proof. But I'm getting ahead of myself, as a good investigator shouldn't do. To understand why I was sitting at my own Christmas dinner table with 3 fractured ribs and a half-millionaire son-in-law who had just tried to kill me, we have to start at the beginning. It was 4 weeks earlier when this whole nightmare began to unfurl. My name is Robert Hawthorne. I am 70 years old, and I spent 42 years of my life with the Metropolitan Police Service, the last 20 as a Chief Superintendent in the Economic Crimes Unit. I'd seen the worst of financial darkness, money laundering, high-level fraud, corporate embezzlement. I thought my retirement would be filled with peace, long afternoons, tending to my wife Elizabeth's rose garden, maybe a fishing trip or 2 up in the Laurentians. Elizabeth passed away 3 years ago. It was pancreatic cancer. She was a fighter until the final curtain, but the disease took her, leaving a permanent hole in the center of my life. After that, my daughter, Clara, became my sole focus. She was our only child, a brilliant oncology nurse at St. Jude's Hospital in Toronto. She had her mother's strong will and unwavering kindness. When she married Victor Sterling 7 years ago, I had my concerns. He was a commercial real estate broker, slick, handsome, and eternally ambitious. He constantly spoke in figures involving multiple millions of dollars, always chasing the next disruptive venture, usually with money he didn't quite possess yet. But Clara loved him deeply, and a father's job is to trust his daughter's judgment, even when his 42 years of police instinct scream otherwise. I kept my reservations to myself. It was late November when Clara called. I was in my home office, sifting through old case files, a habit I hadn't been able to shake. My phone displayed her face, bright and cheerful. "Dad, how are you doing? Still reading those old dry reports?" she teased. "Good, sweetheart. Just organizing. What's up?" "Well, Victor and I were talking, and we realized you haven't been up to the Lakeside Lodge since Mom passed. We thought maybe it would be nice to go this weekend. Just the 3 of us. Get out of the city, spend some quality time together." The lodge. Elizabeth and I had built it 30 years ago on Lake Muskoka, about a 3-hour drive north of Toronto. It was our quiet refuge. I hadn't been back since she died. The memories were simply too sharp. "I don't know, Clara. It's nearly December. The roads get treacherous, and the lodge isn't insulated for deep winter stays," I cautioned. "Victor's already thought of that," she countered quickly. "He had the advanced heating system turned on remotely, and he drove up 2 weeks ago to check all the pipes. Everything is ready, Dad. Plus, it will be good for you. You've been too isolated in that house. Please." There was a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor in her voice, a hint of plea that went beyond simple filial affection. I wondered if she and Victor were struggling. Perhaps she needed neutral, private territory to discuss their troubles. "All right," I finally conceded. "When were you thinking?" "This coming Friday. We could drive up Friday afternoon and stay through Sunday. I'll make Mom's famous beef bourguignon." That sealed it. Elizabeth's bourguignon had been my all-time favorite. Perfect, I agreed. Count me in. Victor will pick you up Friday at noon. Love you, Dad. Love you too, Clara. I hung up, but the lingering unease remained. Was it just the paranoia of a retired cop, or was Victor's sudden, intense interest in the isolated lodge, a place he'd always dismissed as too rustic, genuinely suspicious? I pushed the feeling down. Maybe he was genuinely making an effort for Clara's sake. Friday arrived, blanketed in a cold, unforgiving gray, typical early December weather in southern Ontario. I packed my small duffel bag with warm layers, a journal I intended to fill, and most importantly, my prescription medication for the chronic stress-induced hypertension I'd developed since Elizabeth's death. At precisely noon, Victor's imposing black Cadillac Escalade pulled into my driveway. He was alone. "Where's Clara?" I asked, climbing into the plush passenger seat. "Last-minute crisis," Victor stated, smoothly pulling back onto the street. She got called in for a massive 3-car pileup on the Highway 400. An emergency shift. She said she'll drive up tomorrow morning as soon as she's relieved. Shouldn't we wait for her then? Nah, she insisted we go ahead. Said she didn't want to ruin the entire weekend for us. You know how dedicated she is, always putting her patients first. There was a definite, sharp edge to his voice when he mentioned Clara's dedication, a tone that implied annoyance rather than pride. We drove in strained silence for nearly an hour. Victor seemed exceptionally wired. His grip on the leather steering wheel was tight, his jaw noticeably clenched, and he kept darting tense glances into the rearview mirror. I made a concerted effort to break the tension. "How is the commercial property game these days, Victor? Still building your empire?" "Busy. Always busy," he clipped out. "I've got a massive new development in the works. A massive mixed-use tower downtown. Big investment, but the projected returns are truly extraordinary." That sounds promising. More silence, heavy and uncomfortable. Then Victor cleared his throat, adjusting his tie, despite being in casual wear. "Actually, Robert, I wanted to talk to you about something important." "Here it comes," I thought, my internal detective clock starting to tick. "He needs capital, and I'm the nearest liquid asset. I'm expanding the business exponentially," he continued, his tone shifting to a smooth, practiced pitch. "I'm finalizing the acquisition of an enormous waterfront property, a $50 million deal. The returns could be revolutionary. I was wondering if you might be interested in partnering up. You know, leverage some of your retirement and investment funds. It's a sure thing, Robert. A gold-plated opportunity." There it was. I kept my voice calm and non-committal. How much capital are we talking about to get involved in a deal of that magnitude? Well, to get a respectable equity stake, to really see the returns, we'd be looking at a minimum commitment of around $300,000. But Robert, like I said, the returns would be phenomenal. We're projecting 40 to 50% annualized yield. I fought the urge to roll my eyes. I had spent decades prosecuting men who used those exact figures. No legitimate investment guarantees a 40 to 50% annual return. It was the classic sound of a desperation pitch. "Let me think about it, Victor," I said, looking out the window at the passing blur of snow-covered pines. Victor's demeanor shifted instantly. His knuckles went bone white as he gripped the wheel. "Sure, Robert, take your time. But I need to know quickly. The window on this acquisition is closing fast. The opportunity won't last another week." We left the main highway, turning onto the narrow, snow-drifted access road that led deep into the woods toward the lodge. The winter forest closed in around us, massive trees heavy with fresh snow. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in deep, bruised shades of purple and orange. Victor was driving aggressively, far too fast for the icy conditions. The heavy vehicle hydroplaned momentarily on a patch of black ice. "Easy, Victor," I cautioned, instinctively tensing up. "No need to rush the final kilometer." He ignored me, flooring the accelerator. We arrived at the lodge just as true darkness fell. It looked profoundly isolated, a single wooden structure swallowed by the immense, quiet wilderness. The nearest occupied residence was a full 5 kilometers away. I also recalled that this deep in the woods, our satellite phone was unreliable and there was absolutely no cell service. We'd installed a ruggedized landline years ago for emergencies, but I hadn't checked if it was still active. Victor killed the engine, and the ensuing silence was absolute. He quickly grabbed his designer luggage from the back, then mine. "I'll get these inside, Robert. You go on ahead and start a roaring fire. It's colder than I anticipated." I stepped out. The air hit me. It was freezing. The lodge was indeed cold. Despite Victor's earlier claims about checking the system and turning on the heat, my breath plumed out in thick, white clouds. I located the central thermostat and cranked it all the way up, noting with professional dismay that the needle was stuck stubbornly on 10 degrees Celsius. I moved to the huge fieldstone fireplace. The iron grate was empty. "Victor," I called out, "we need to get firewood from the storage shed." "I'll do it in a minute," he yelled back. "Just let me take this quick call." He disappeared into the guest bedroom, closing the heavy pine door behind him. I heard the low, urgent murmur of his voice, too low to make out the words, but the tone was hushed, stressed, and clearly involved a desperate negotiation. While he was occupied, I pulled on my coat and decided to handle the firewood myself. I needed the heat, and I needed to move. The woodshed was located on a lower elevation around the back of the lodge, accessed by a set of rugged, wooden stairs leading down from the main deck. The stairs were old, weathered by 30 seasons of harsh Muskoka winters. Elizabeth had always insisted we needed to replace them, but we never got around to it. I grabbed several heavy logs, stacking them carefully in my arms. As I started back up, my boot landed on the second step from the top. That's when I felt it, and that's when I saw it. My heart didn't just drop. It froze, the kind of icy realization that only 42 years of investigating criminal intent can bring. The second step from the top had been deliberately sawed 3/4 of the way through. The cut was cunningly concealed by a thin, fresh layer of snow that had drifted onto the deck. If anyone, especially a 70-year-old man carrying a heavy load, put their full weight on that exact spot, the step would snap cleanly, sending them plummeting down onto the frozen, rocky ground a good 2.5 meters below. An accident. A fatal fall on a dark, unlit stairwell. I carefully stepped over the compromised riser, my muscles screaming with controlled tension. Inside, my blood ran cold. I gently put the logs down and returned to the stairs. Brushing the snow away, I examined the cut more closely. It was clean, precise, and fresh. A dusting of fine, pale sawdust clung to the rough grain of the wood. This had been done very recently, almost certainly within the last few hours. I carefully re-entered the lodge. Victor was in the kitchen, casually unloading expensive groceries from a professional-grade cooler. "Found the problem with the deck stairs," I stated, watching his face with the trained detachment of a professional investigator interviewing a suspect. "Oh yeah? What's wrong?" he asked, not looking up. "Second step from the top," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "It's rotting through. Nearly went right through it. We'll need to put a temporary brace under it." His expression didn't flicker. It was an excellent practice poker face. "That's dangerous, Robert. Good thing you spotted it. I'll take a look tomorrow in the daylight. See if we can shore it up." He was good. I'd interrogated countless con artists, and Victor's composure was impressive. But I knew the tiny, almost invisible flicker of triumph at the corner of his left eye. He was lying, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. "Yeah," I murmured, my gaze locked on him. "Good thing." That night, sleep was a distant luxury. I lay rigid in the main bedroom, the one Elizabeth and I had shared, staring into the black void above the rustic rafters. My mind, sharp despite my age, was methodically compiling the facts. The sawed stair, Victor's calculated lie about the lodge being heated, the intense pressure for the $300,000 investment, and Clara's suspiciously convenient absence. A clear, horrifying pattern was taking shape, and it pointed directly to premeditated assault, if not outright murder. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of overly strong coffee. Victor was already up, moving with an almost feverish, restless energy. He was excessively cheerful, almost manic. "Morning, Robert. Sleep well?" Well enough, I replied curtly. When is Clara scheduled to arrive? She texted me late last night. Victor lied smoothly. Her emergency shift ran long. She won't make it until late afternoon, maybe 6 or 7. I thought you and I could use the time. Maybe take the snowmobiles out. The lake ice should be solid enough now. Snowmobiling on Lake Muskoka in sub-zero temperatures with a man I now knew was actively trying to kill me. Maybe later, I said, trying to appear dismissive. My old hip has been acting up. I think I'll stay here and relax by the fire, read this history volume I brought. Victor's forced smile tightened, revealing the frustration underneath. Come on, Robert. Don't be a bore. Elizabeth wouldn't want you sitting around like a tired old man. The casual, cruel mention of Elizabeth in that context made the muscles in my jaw clench, a purely visceral reaction. I held my temper. I said, maybe later, Victor. After a rapid and silent breakfast of instant oatmeal, Victor announced his plan. I'm heading into the nearest small town for some essential supplies. The cooler didn't hold up, and we're low on proper coffee beans. Should only take about an hour and a half round trip. You'll be fine here alone. Victor, I've been taking care of myself for 70 years, I replied, allowing a hint of scorn into my voice. I believe I'll manage. The instant his massive black Escalade disappeared down the gravel road, kicking up a plume of frozen dust, I went to work. 42 years of detective training commanded the sequence. First, I checked the communications. I went straight to the old pine desk where the landline was usually connected. It was inert. Tracing the cord revealed the problem. The main cable, hidden meticulously behind the antique desk, had been cut cleanly with a pair of shears. Another accident. Second, I needed the motive confirmed. I went to the guest bedroom Victor was occupying. His luggage was a high-end leather trunk. I went through it with professional speed and precision, replacing everything exactly as I found it. Buried beneath a stack of expensive Italian sweaters, I found a folder. Inside were the documents I needed. Mortgage papers on a failing commercial complex in Toronto, dated just 4 months ago. The amount was staggering, $2.3 million. Gambling debts, a collection of casino cash advance receipts, dozens of them, totaling nearly $400,000 from Niagara and Detroit. Collection notices, a thick stack of increasingly aggressive letters from collection agencies, capped by a final, terrifying notice of imminent foreclosure on several properties. Victor wasn't just in financial difficulty. He was in a state of terminal economic collapse. At the very bottom of the folder, I found the final piece of the puzzle, the one that made my hands tremble not from fear, but from cold, focused rage. Life insurance documents. Mine. A whole life policy Elizabeth and I had taken out decades ago, now valued at a substantial $750,000. The beneficiary had initially been Elizabeth, then changed to Clara after her passing. However, according to these freshly printed documents, the beneficiary had been subtly and recently changed just 8 months ago to Victor Sterling. The document bore a crude, but passable, forgery of my signature. My focus hardened. This was no longer just about financial opportunism. This was a clear, documented plot to commit insurance fraud via murder. I meticulously restored everything to Victor's bag. I needed more evidence, something that would stick to him in court, something concrete that would transcend the usual he said of a domestic confrontation. Desperate men were predictable, and Victor was drowning. I immediately went outside to the deck stairs. Using the high-resolution camera on my phone, I took a series of close-up photos of the sod stair, the fine sawdust, and the surrounding snow, all meticulously time-stamped and geotagged. Then, I circled to the rear of the property. The door to the secondary storage shed where the tools, including a handsaw, were kept had fresh, small pry marks visible around the aged lock mechanism. Victor hadn't just found a saw. He had actively broken into the secure shed to acquire the specific tool needed for the job. He wasn't planning a simple accident. He was executing a calculated plan for premeditated capital murder. When Victor returned, exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes later, I was sitting by the roaring fire. I had finally managed to build it using the wood I fetched, my historical volume open in my lap, appearing for all the world like a relaxed, slightly drowsy old gentleman enjoying his solitary weekend. "Hey, Robert, got everything we needed," Victor said, dropping a bag of gourmet coffee beans onto the kitchen counter. He was back to his polished, confident self, but I detected the underlying desperation, a fragile performance. "How about we take those snowmobiles out now? Get some fresh air." "Actually, Victor," I said, slowly closing my book, "I was thinking about your investment opportunity. Tell me more about it." His face instantly brightened, momentarily replacing the stress with pure, avaricious excitement. For the next hour, he launched into his pitch, showing me glossy, highly manufactured brochures on his phone schematics for the $50 million waterfront complex, projected tenant lists, and flowcharts illustrating the fictitious 40 to 50% annualized returns. He spoke with the conviction of a true sociopath, fully believing his own lies, even as the foreclosure notices sat tucked in his own luggage. "So, what do you think?" he asked finally, leaning forward, his eyes intense. "I think I need to see the actual property records," I said, keeping my voice mild and measured. "I need to meet with your so-called partners, and as a former chief superintendent of economic crimes, I'd require a full, audited review of the financials and the project's debt structure. You understand, Victor? I'm a careful man. $750,000 is a great deal of money." His expression hardened, the smile evaporating completely. He straightened, slowly withdrawing into himself. "There isn't time for all that, Robert. I told you this acquisition window is closing. I need commitments now. And I guess it's not meant to be, Victor." I allowed a soft finality to enter my voice. The temperature in the room plummeted, independent of the winter cold. Victor stood up slowly, his hands clenching into white, tight fists at his sides. "You never liked me, did you, Robert?" he hissed, his polished veneer cracking. "You never once thought I was good enough for Clara. You always treated me like one of your damn suspects. This isn't about liking you, Victor. This is about attempted fraud and my daughter's future." "Shut up, old man." His voice dropped to a dangerous, low snarl. "I'm talking now." He took a menacing step closer. "You know what your problem is? You think you're so smart, so morally superior with your police medals and your perfect little life. But you're just a washed-up relic who couldn't even save his wife from the cancer that ate her alive." The personal blow was intended to destabilize me, and it struck deep into my unresolved grief. But 42 years of police work taught me how to keep my face a blank slate. "I think you should leave the lodge, Victor." "Leave? We're 3 hours from the city, Robert. It's my vehicle that got us here, and Clara won't be here for hours." He smiled then, a truly frightening, cold expression. "Besides, we haven't finished our conversation about the insurance, have we? See, I really need that money, and one way or another, I'm going to get it." He moved toward me, cornering me against the fireplace mantel. I instantly stood, positioning the solid fieldstone hearth between us. 70 years old I might be, but I was in fighting shape and my training was hardwired. "This is your final warning, Victor. Leave now, and we can deal with the financial crimes tomorrow when Clara is present." "Clara is not coming," he said, his eyes glittering with reckless abandon. "I told her not to. I told her we needed masculine bonding time, you and me. She thinks we're having a wonderful father-son weekend." He paused, circling me. "So, what's your plan, Chief Superintendent? Arrest me? Or did you plan to kill me and claim self-defense? Make it look like an accident." He let out a short, cynical laugh. "Kill you? Jesus, Robert, you have been watching too many old cop films. I'm not going to kill you outright. You're going to have a series of unfortunate accidents. First, the stairs you already noticed, or maybe a simple misstep on the ice. Hell, perhaps your weak heart just gives out from the sheer stress of being so far from your blood pressure medication." "My medication?" My internal alarm screamed. Victor pulled a small, orange bottle from the pocket of his tailored slacks. "My prescription hypertension medication." "Oops," he murmured, tossing the bottle lightly in his palm. "Must have fallen out of your bag while I was unloading it. These old lodges are so terribly dangerous, Robert. So many things can tragically go wrong." That was the signal. He dropped the bottle onto the floor and lunged, moving with a brutal, targeted force of a desperate man. I reacted instantly, relying purely on muscle memory. I sidestepped, using his own momentum against him, and Victor crashed heavily into the thick oak coffee table, sending a heavy crystal decanter spinning to the floor. But he was nearly 40 years younger, powered by adrenaline and a looming $2.3 million debt. He recovered with terrifying speed, launching himself back at me. This time, his fist connected with crushing force beneath my left armpit. I heard a distinct, sickening crack, the sound of breaking cartilage and bone. The pain was immediate and blinding. I stumbled, momentarily paralyzed, and he was on me instantly, his hands clamping down on my throat. Black, swimming spots danced in my peripheral vision. The air supply was cut off. This was it. This was the end. Murdered by the man I should have trusted to protect my daughter in the sanctuary I had built with Elizabeth. But then, the final, desperate surge of survival instinct broke through the fog of oxygen deprivation. I remembered the safe house. Elizabeth's security. Elizabeth, always the cautious one after years of my high-profile cases, had insisted we keep a discreet, untraceable means of self-defense at the remote lodge. It was a well-maintained 9mm semi-automatic pistol, stored exactly where I'd always trained her to keep it. I bucked my hips with all the strength left in my 7-year-old frame, throwing Victor off balance just enough to gasp a tiny, life-giving breath. I brought my knee up hard and fast, connecting with his lower abdomen. He bellowed in pain, releasing his strangling grip. I rolled away, chest burning, and scrambled toward the bedroom door. He was right behind me, his heavy footsteps pounding on the floorboards. I yanked open the drawer of the bedside nightstand. The pistol was there, fully loaded, exactly where Elizabeth had left it, inside a worn leather pouch beneath a stack of old magazines. I spun around just as Victor reached the doorway. He froze, his panting form staring down the dark, uncompromising barrel of the 9mm. Back off, I wheezed, my throat raw and constricted, the pain in my ribs an inferno. Now! He raised his hands slowly, but his eyes were calculating, already searching for an escape route or a moment of hesitation. "You won't shoot me, Robert," he sneered, trying to sound confident. "You're a man of rules. A cop. Besides, how would you ever explain shooting Clara's husband? Self-defense." I managed the word a struggle. "And you'd be amazed what a 70-year-old man will do when he's fighting for his last breath." I gestured with the pistol toward the main sitting area. "Move." Slowly, he complied, backing away reluctantly. I followed, keeping the weapon steady and trained squarely on his chest. My cracked ribs screamed a constant, debilitating protest with every movement, but the adrenaline, the old, familiar fight hormone, kept me upright and ruthlessly focused. "Sit in that armchair," I ordered, hands flat on the armrests, where I can see them. While I kept the 9mm trained unwaveringly on Victor, I began securing him. I moved to the lodge's junk drawer, the repository of all forgotten necessities, and found a heavy-duty roll of silver duct tape and a length of sturdy, plastic-coated utility cord. I first used the duct tape, applying several tight, overlapping layers to secure his wrists firmly to the thick wooden armrests of the chair. The tape hissed as I pulled it taut. He was struggling, trying to subtly shift his weight and flex his hands, but the tape held. Then, I used the utility cord to bind his ankles tightly to the heavy chair legs. It wasn't the meticulous restraint of a specialized tactical team, but it would hold him, immobile and uncomfortable, long enough. "You can't keep me here, Robert," Victor spat, his voice laced with venomous panic. "Clara will come looking. She'll alert the authorities when I don't show up. No satellite phone, no cell service, remember?" I reminded him, my voice flat. "The landline's cut, thanks to you. Clara won't worry until late tomorrow morning at the absolute earliest. That's a full 15 hours of silence. By then, the Toronto police will be here." His face, which had been pale with anger, suddenly went slack with fear. "What are you talking about? What did you do before I got back from town?" I sat down heavily in the opposing antique chair, the pistol resting on my lap, still aimed at his center mass. My ribs throbbed a constant, screaming companion, but the adrenaline had reached a steady plateau. I walked to the main access road. I lied calmly and convincingly. It was a perfect, necessary bluff. It's about a 3-kilometer hike, but I found just enough intermittent signal to fire off some crucial texts. I sent one to Clara, telling her I was increasingly concerned about your erratic behavior and the unexpected isolation. More importantly, I sent a detailed message to Detective Inspector Elaine Carter, my former partner at the Economic Crimes Unit Detachment. I told her I'd uncovered evidence of massive fraud and what looked like a highly suspicious, calculated accident setup at the lodge. I told her I needed backup immediately. Victor's demeanor shifted from aggressive defiance to desperate calculation. It's a lie. You didn't make it to the road, did I? I countered, raising an eyebrow. Inspector Carter is tenacious, and she knows me well. If she received a warning text from me stating I was in danger from a fraud artist who was trying to coerce me into a $300,000 investment, she would already be mobilizing a team. She's probably coordinating with the provincial authorities right now. They'll be here well before Clara. The conviction in my voice was absolute. 42 years of staring down violent criminals taught me how to sell a lie better than Victor could sell a fictitious waterfront condo. You can't prove anything, Robert, he shouted, though his voice lacked any true certainty. I reached for my phone and carefully scrolled through the photo gallery. I showed him the series of high-resolution images, the close-up of the sawed wooden riser, the distinct pattern of fresh sawdust, the geotag confirming the exact, isolated location. Actually, I can Victor. The Ontario Provincial Police, OPP, Forensic Unit will be very interested in this time-stamped evidence. Plus, the documents I located in your luggage, the insurance policy, the forged signature changing the beneficiary, the foreclosure notices, the $400,000 in gambling receipts. That's multiple counts of high-level financial fraud, Victor. And combined with the documented assault, I just endured the ligature marks on my throat. The 3 fractured ribs. The charges for attempted capital murder are going to stick. You are looking at a very lengthy sentence. His face crumpled, the last vestiges of his bravado dissolving. He looked suddenly small, pathetic, and deeply afraid. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Robert, he whispered, his eyes watering. The debts, the pressure just kept climbing, and I thought if I could just access that capital, I could flip the downtown project and pay everyone back. I love Clara, Robert. I do. But I was in too deep. So you decided to kill me, her father, to take my insurance money? I needed that $750,000, he confessed, the words spilling out in a rush. After you were gone, I was going to take care of Clara. I swear. The insurance payout, plus the proceed from selling your home, your savings, would have been enough to cover all the debts and still leave a substantial amount for Clara. I would have been her hero. You would have bankrupted my daughter's inheritance and ruined her life trying to save yourself from prison, Victor. He looked away, unable to deny the truth. I sighed, a painful, heavy sound that racked my chest. I kept the gun resting firmly in my lap. You know what the absolute saddest thing is, Victor? If you had just walked into my office and been honest, if you'd told me you were drowning in $400,000 of gambling debt, I might have helped. Not with the debts themselves, but with getting you into a reputable treatment facility, helping you find a legitimate way out. That is what family is supposed to do. We're not family, he choked out, his eyes blazing with lingering hatred. You made sure I knew that every single day I entered this house. Perhaps there was a tiny, uncomfortable sliver of truth in that accusation. Perhaps I hadn't been as welcoming to the ambitious young broker as a father-in-law should have been. But that failure of acceptance did not, under any circumstances, excuse attempted murder and high-level fraud. We sat in the growing, icy silence as the short winter day ended and the deep cold of the wilderness settled in. I didn't dare move to gather more firewood. I couldn't risk leaving Victor even for a moment, not with the remote chance he could work the crude bonds free. So, we waited, shivering in the rapidly cooling lodge. It was well past 9 o'clock that night, when headlights finally sliced through the inky blackness beyond the lodge windows. A vehicle was pulling up outside. My heart, despite the constant pain from my ribs, kicked into a heavy rhythm. Had my bluff worked? Was it Detective Inspector Carter and the Toronto police? The heavy front door swung inward and Clara walked in. She stopped dead on the cold threshold, taking in the scene instantly. Me bruised, visibly struggling to breathe, and holding a substantial 9mm pistol. Victor Sterling, her handsome, sophisticated husband, taped and bound to the armchair. Her face drained of all color, going stark white. "Dad? What in God's name happened? What did you do?" "Not what I did, sweetheart," I rasped, my voice sounding foreign and scratchy from the recent choking. "What he did." I quickly, concisely explained the sequence of events. The sod stair, the cut landline, the enormous financial debt, the forged insurance documents, and the final, violent attack in the living room that resulted in my 3 fractured ribs and the ligature marks on my throat. I delivered the facts dispassionately, like reading a police report, letting the weight of the evidence speak for itself. With each revelation, I watched my daughter's face undergo a terrible transformation. Confusion curdled into disbelief. Disbelief turned to raw horror, and horror finally settled into a profound, searing grief. When I finished, she slowly turned to Victor, her eyes red-rimmed but fixed. "Is it true, Victor?" He couldn't meet her gaze, staring instead at the floorboards. "Clara, I can explain. It's a huge misunderstanding. Robert is misinterpreting things." "Is it true?" she repeated, her voice rising in cold, controlled desperation. "I was desperate," he finally admitted, his voice a low plea. "I made terrible mistakes, but I did it all for us, Clara, for our future, so we wouldn't lose everything." "You tried to kill my father," she stated, the accusation slicing through the quiet air. Her voice broke completely then. "How is that for us? How is that remotely a future?" She pulled out her phone, her hand shaking violently. "I'm calling the police. I'm calling them right now." "No signal here, Clara," I reminded her softly, "and the landline is cut. We have to drive out to the main highway where there's service." Clara stared at Victor one last time. In that agonizing silence, I witnessed her heartbreak in real time, the instantaneous, total destruction of 7 years of marriage and trust. The soft, loving expression she usually held for him hardened, giving way to a resolute expression I had only seen before when she was fighting for a patient's life in the hospital. She became someone I didn't quite recognize, yet someone I was immensely proud of. "Let's go, Dad," she said, her voice steady and steel-edged. "We'll take my car. He can stay right here and spend the night contemplating the true meaning of future." "Clara, we can't just leave him secured like this," I protested faintly. "Watch me," she said, offering no room for debate. We left Victor Sterling taped and tied to the mahogany chair. We walked to her Honda CR-V, a comfortable, sensible vehicle utterly out of place next to Victor's garish Escalade. Clara drove with unnerving focus, taking the treacherous access road at a reasonable speed. We drove for nearly 20 minutes before the phone finally buzzed, signaling a connection. She immediately called the Toronto Police Service, TPS, explaining in quick, clear, concise language that there had been a severe assault at the Muskoka Lodge and the perpetrator was restrained but dangerous. Detective Inspector Elaine Carter, my old partner, met us an hour later at the nearest provincial detachment. I gave my official statement, showing her the photographic evidence on my phone and explaining the location of the forged insurance documents in Victor's luggage at the lodge. The OPP Tactical Unit, working in coordination with the TPS, arrested Victor at the remote lodge 3 hours later. The list of charges was extensive: attempted capital murder, high-level financial fraud, forgery of the insurance beneficiary change, and assault causing bodily harm. The 3 fractured ribs and the ligature marks. The evidence, the forged documents, the cut landline, the sod stair, and my immediate statement as a 42-year veteran of the police force was overwhelming. Which brings us back to the Christmas dinner table, 4 weeks after that terrifying, freezing weekend. The 3 fractured ribs Victor had given me were healing, painfully slow, making it excruciating to sit upright for any length of time. but I had insisted on hosting the family dinner as planned. Clara deserved some semblance of normalcy, a return to tradition, after the profound betrayal she had endured. Victor, due to his immense resources and the skill of his corporate legal team, was out on bail pending trial. His lawyers had convinced the judge he was not a flight risk, not with his extensive business holdings, and, crucially, Clara still legally being his wife. She had filed for divorce the day after his arrest, but these things move at a glacial pace in the Canadian court system. And somehow, for reasons of closure, she insisted upon Clara had allowed Victor to attend the family Christmas dinner. "I need to face him one last time," she'd explained, her eyes raw. "I need to do it with my family surrounding me. I need to sever this cord cleanly." I had argued against it vehemently, but she was my daughter, and she was hurting, so I had reluctantly agreed. Now, sitting at my own table, my broken body screaming in protest, I watched Victor play the role of the grossly misunderstood victim. My younger brother, Arthur, and his wife, Carol, sat rigidly, unsure where to place their eyes. Clara's cousin, Michael, kept glaring with barely contained rage at Victor. The tension in the dining room was so palpable, it felt like a heavy, invisible blanket. "So, Robert," Victor said, his voice carrying the same smooth, false geniality, cutting through the heavy silence of the dining room. "Now that you've had a few weeks to reconsider, realize this was all just a major misunderstanding. When do you intend to instruct your lawyer to drop these absurd charges? I mean, we're family, right?" The entire table fell absolutely silent. Every eye was locked on me. I carefully placed my fork down on the edge of the plate, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a fresh jolt of agony through my 3 fractured ribs. I looked Victor directly in the eye, my gaze steady and uncompromising. "A misunderstanding, Victor? Is that what you're choosing to call attempted murder now?" "Dad," Clara started, a note of fear in her voice, but I gently held up a hand, silencing her. "No, sweetheart. Let me say this. Victor needs to hear the facts one last time, in the presence of witnesses." I turned back to him, leaning forward slightly, ignoring the searing pain in my chest. "You methodically sawed through the main exterior stairs of my lodge, planning for me to fall to my death and make it look like a clumsy, late-night accident. You cut the emergency landline, so I cannot call for help. You then forged my signature to change the beneficiary on a $750,000 life insurance policy. And when none of your planned accidents worked fast enough for your crippling debt timeline, you put your hand around my throat and tried to choke the life out of me." Victor's mask finally, irrevocably slipped. His face twisted into a snarl. "You can't prove the forgery. You can't prove the intent. The Toronto police have a full forensic report, Victor," I stated calmly. "They have the time-stamped photographs of the sawed stair, the foreclosure documents from your office, and your fingerprints on the specific tool you used to break into the shed. And then there's this." I carefully pulled the neck of my cashmere sweater up and away from my body, revealing the massive, hideous sprawl of purple, yellow, and deep green bruising across my chest and ribs. 3 documented fractured ribs, severe contusions, and the distinct ligature marks on my throat. I explained, letting the family stare at the graphic evidence of his violence. All meticulously documented by the hospital the night Clara drove me in. "This isn't conjecture, Victor. This is physical evidence. Assault causing bodily harm minimum." I pulled my sweater back down and leaned in further, projecting quiet, devastating authority. "You didn't teach me a lesson about getting old, Victor. You didn't prove I was weak, forgetful, or in your way. You proved something far more profound about yourself." "What's that?" he asked, his voice tight and shaking with fury. "That you are a coward who tried to murder an unarmed, 70-year-old man for insurance money," I stated, the final word ringing with absolute conviction. "And you still failed." The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara was crying quietly, tears streaming down her face. My brother Arthur simply shook his head in disgust. Cousin Michael looked ready to leap across the table and physically attack Victor. Victor scraped his chair back with a violent screech against the wooden floor and stood up. "This is intolerable. This is abuse. I don't have to sit here and take this. Clara, we're leaving now. No, Clara said, her voice quiet, but cutting through his bluster like a razor. Victor froze, confused. What? She looked up at him, her beautiful eyes red and swollen, but her voice was as steady as my pistol hand had been in the lodge. No, Victor, you are leaving alone. The divorce papers are being served to your lawyer first thing tomorrow morning. My counsel has assured me that with the sheer volume of criminal charges, especially the fraud and the assault, I will be awarded nearly everything. The house, the vehicle, the assets you haven't liquidated for gambling. All of it. She stood up, matching his height. You're going to prison, Victor, and when you get out, you will have absolutely nothing. No wife, no family, no assets, and certainly no future. Clara, please. I'm giving you a chance. Get out of my father's house. Victor looked around the dining table one last time, desperately searching for a single ally, a single sympathetic face. He found none, only cold disgust and triumphant clarity. Finally, his sophisticated mask fractured completely. You're all going to regret this. I'll appeal. I'll fight this for 10 years. You'll go to prison. I finished calmly, leaning back. The Crown prosecutor tells me your lawyer is already hinting at a plea deal. You're looking at a minimum of 8 to 12 years in a federal correctional institution. And in Canadian prisons, Victor, they have a special dislike for men who prey on the elderly and try to financially destroy their wives. You'll have a lot of time to reflect on your choices. He stared at me, his eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred, the type of toxic malice I'd only encountered in the most hardened criminals. He stormed out of the dining room. We heard the crunch of his tires spinning violently on the icy driveway as he sped away in his black Escalade, his hasty exit marking the end of his respectable life. After a long moment of silence, my brother Arthur slowly raised his wine glass. To Robert, tough as granite, even after everything. To Dad, Clara added, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, so profoundly sorry for everything. Nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart. I told her, my heart aching with pride and pity. You love the wrong man. That is not a crime. But you made the absolute right choice in the end, and that is all that matters. We finished the dinner quietly. Afterward, when everyone had gone home, Clara stayed behind. We sat in the living room by the diminishing glow of the fireplace, not speaking, simply existing together in the aftermath. He really would have killed you, she finally said, stating a fact, not asking a question. Yes, he would have, I confirmed. And you kept yourself alive, using everything you learned in all those years with the Metropolitan Police Service. Yes, Elizabeth would be proud of how you handled it. That made me smile, a real, genuine expression, despite the stiffness and pain in my chest. Your mother would have used that 9mm the second he walked in the door. She never trusted him much either. That drew a small, watery laugh from Clara, the first genuine, spontaneous sound of mirth I had heard from her in weeks. We sat there until the last log burned low, father and daughter, survivors both. Victor's trial is currently set for the spring. The physical and digital evidence is overwhelming, and his lawyer has already conceded to the prosecutor that they are seeking the plea agreement. I will testify, if necessary, though the prosecutor believes the weight of the evidence will preclude the need. I sold the Lakeside Lodge. Too many toxic memories now overlaying the deep, sweet ones I had made with Elizabeth. The proceeds were placed into an asset trust for Clara, helping her rebuild her life and stabilize her future. My ribs are healing slowly. At 70 years old, everything takes longer, but I am still here, still breathing, still standing. Victor tried to teach me a harsh lesson about vulnerability, about getting old, about being weak, about being a relic in his ambitious path. Instead, I taught him one. Age is not incompetence. Experience is not irrelevant. A desperate, young criminal with a poorly executed plan is absolutely no match for a calm, methodical man with 42 years of arresting criminals. That is the profound lesson Victor learned that weekend in the remote woods, and it's one he will have a minimum of 8 years to remember while wearing institutional orange. As for me, I am learning to live again. I've started volunteering at a community security center, teaching self-defense and awareness training to seniors. Don't be a victim, I tell them. Stay alert, trust your gut, and never, ever drop your guard. If my harrowing experience can help even one person avoid a similar tragedy, then some good came from that terrible cold weekend. Clara is improving too. She is in grief counseling, working through the emotional violence and betrayal. She keeps apologizing, but I keep reminding her of the same essential truth. She didn't do this. Victor did. She is the ultimate victim here, too. Sometimes late at night, I think about those black moments on the lodge floor, Victor's hands tightening, my vision fading to black. I reflect on how close I came to never seeing another sunrise, never hearing Clara laugh again. And then I think of Elizabeth, and I can hear her voice in my memory, tough, practical, and utterly unsentimental. You survived, Robert. You won't get that time back. So stop dwelling on the dark moments and start living the ones you have left. So that is precisely what I'm doing. Living one careful, precious breath at a time, with my healed but tender ribs constantly reminding me that I'm still here, still fighting, and still refusing to let anyone else write the final chapter of my life. Victor thought he could get away with murder and fraud. Instead, he's getting a decade-long prison sentence, an eternal criminal record, and the crushing knowledge that he tried to assassinate a 70-year-old man and failed completely. That is justice. Slow, thorough, and absolutely certain. And for me, I got something infinitely more valuable than revenge. I got my life back, I protected my daughter, and I had the profound satisfaction of knowing that experience, training, and a deep-seated refusal to quit can still win the day. Even when you're 70 years old, physically compromised and heartbroken, you can still win. You just have to be smart, stay calm under fire, and never, ever underestimate what an old cop knows about how to catch a desperate criminal. Victor learned that lesson the hardest way possible. As for that cruel toast he made at Christmas dinner about the old man learning his lesson, he was right about one thing. Someone learned an unforgettable lesson that weekend in the Muskoka Lodge. It just wasn't me.